I think the important question to begin the discussion is to ask why we convened, why the five of us convened the conference in the first place, and why so many of you wanted to attend this conference. I think it's because we can envision a world without survivors now. And I'm one of the second generation, and my parents are still alive, but it's a very difficult thing to imagine, but we have to begin to envision a world without survivors, and most of us, for whom this is a very important existential topic, find this prospect extremely unsettling. I've heard words like anxiety. Yes, I feel anxiety too, but I feel very unsettled. And I feel unsettled not only because there will no longer be survivors to testify, because now there are such vast collections of testimony, but it seems to me that the very existence of survivors somehow validates. I've heard the word now both in Hebrew, I've heard in Hebrew, shlichut, I've heard some people say mission. It validates why we do what we do, their very existence. And when they finally pass from before our eyes, how will we continue this mission? So I think this is the backdrop to the conference. One interesting trend, or very quickly I'll mention two things. First of all, it seems to me that it's become clear to me that there are many innovative topics, histories yet untold, for which testimony may be the only source. So many speakers spoke to this. Things like family life, emotional responses, defiance, nonconformity. So that's a very important trend that I see evolving among many of us, to use testimonies to supplement and to begin to explore, or further explore, areas for which testimony is the only source. And then I also have to say I'm extremely impressed by the educators among us, those who try to make the Holocaust, who want to make the Holocaust meaningful to future generations. And I'm not a youngster anymore, but I remember people used to, 15, 20 years ago, there were many people who wanted to do this, and they had goodwill, but they didn't have the skill set that so many younger people have now to make the Holocaust meaningful to high school students, for example. So I think that's also been a very important trend, something that really stood out to me in the conference.
Okay, thanks, Gabi. So one thing, I don't know if this is on. Yeah. Okay, so one thing is, I'm going to take it out. So I made a list of 12 things, but just, I mean, as Gabi pointed out, sort of the timing is everything, right? On sort of the idea of 2016, thinking about the future, to me, sort of this idea of the future of Holocaust testimonies is sort of central. You know, it feels like we are at this, or we know we're at this major turning point, and so you know, that's why this is so critical at this time. I'm incredibly impressed by sort of the scope and the breadth. You know, and to be honest with you, when we first discussed this, and when Boaz said we do these conferences about testimonies, sort of in my mind I had one sort of type of testimony, or a couple types of testimony, and one of the things that's become very clear to me is that perhaps we need to have an even better, more refined definition of testimony that encapsulates sort of all the different sources that we're talking about. I mean, we've talked about letters, diaries, memoirs, oral histories, legal testimonies, audiovisual material, and more, just in the past day and a half. And so we count these all as testimonies, but something important for us to think about. One of the other critical questions that's come up for me is sort of this distinction between production of testimony and reception of testimony. And we've spent a lot of time on both sides of these, right? How are these produced, and what's the context in which it's produced? What are the factors that affect the production of the testimony? And then obviously a great deal of discussion about sort of the model reader, the model listener, the model learner, and how that affects context, affects the reception of the testimony. I have a lot of other things here about authenticity versus truth, the timing of testimony creation, impact of trauma, which we haven't talked about, but maybe we can get into in greater detail. But I'll pass the mic as we think towards the future.
I really enjoy myself. We worked a year on this, so I think that it's on my mind before that. It's on my mind before this conference, but it's stronger throughout. I feel there's a big difference between witnessing and in history. Between the theories that we hear about testimonies, especially from literature, psychology, even sociology, than what we historians do. I'll say it even worse. It seems that we are talking more about witnessing than we are talking about testimony, about the history. And I feel that as a historian, there is a problem here. I'll explain in one sentence. When we talk about what were testimonies taken for, they were taken in order to know what happened in the Holocaust. And the people who took them, by the way, the first testimonies which I deal with, were people who came from standard history. There were no Jewish oral historians around. The people who collected the historical commissions were regular historians, were not oral historians. And they had to invent historical data, which they did through testimony. So they were not interested in the moral witness, and they didn't think there was a moral witness. They were arguing with their witnesses. They were saying that you're saying nonsense, that they're trying to collaborate testimony. So I think something happened on the way when historians forgot about testimonies and psychiatrists and literary scholars came in, and suddenly there's a totally different issue at hand. And so I feel this divide very strongly, and I think I have to work this out.
Thank you. First of all, I have to make a disclaimer. So I was not an organizer of this conference, but I feel very honored to be here, and I actually can picture myself very well to be an organizer of this conference. So if there is a let's say, Future of Testimonies 5, I probably would hope to be included with the show foundation.
This model did present you as
So I feel pretty comfortable up here. I can only a little bit echoing what Avi and were kind of touching upon. So first of all, for me, was important enriching the interdisciplinary kind of treatment of or discussion, because I think there are very important insights from all of the different disciplines actually we can learn from. And what I try to do in my center is actually exactly this, bringing disciplines together which are separated and divided. And so I thought this was very important. However, I'm an historian, and so what I would like to urge is also sometimes when we focus so much on testimonies, they seem so extraordinary, since they are kind of also very special because they are from survivors. But I would want to urge to treat them actually as very ordinary. That means as ordinary sources, as any source we actually work with. So what I want to urge here for is to really apply the same critique we apply at other sources also to testimonies. That means really the old kind of fashioned source critique is kind of missing often when people work with testimonies, and I think this needs to be there too.
I think this has been a wonderful conference, and I want to thank Miriam and Boaz for the special work that they've done. They've worked much harder than the rest of us, no offense to Gabi or Avi. And I'm grateful to be here. I think one thing that I've been thinking about a lot as we've all been talking, conversations in the hall and the presentations, is it seems to me that our situation is characterized by two almost opposing situations. One is the passing of survivors, which we've talked about, which strikes us, I think, as a looming absence and distance and immeasurable loss on the one hand. But on the other hand, there's been this massive expansion of the number and kinds of testimonies and new technologies and formats, which I think strikes us in almost the opposite way, as an almost overwhelming presence and proximity and even pressure to do justice to these testimonies that, in a sense, have been bequeathed to us and future generations. So we're faced, on the one hand, with this looming absence, distance, and loss. And on the other hand, we have this overwhelming presence, proximity, and pressure. And I think that's the situation of scholars working on Holocaust testimony today. And I think it's also the situation of anyone who's learning about the Holocaust. So, in thinking about this conference, I was thinking there's a lot about it that's actually a really wonderful response to that strange situation. And I think there are 4 things that I saw coming out of the presentations that are, I think, important responses, tasks, practices that I'd love to think about more. And I'll just quickly say them, because I know I was only supposed to do one. So one is that it seems to me that we are doing it at this conference, and we need to do more of paying attention to the multiple modes in which we engage testimonies, thinking very carefully about the very practices of reading, listening, viewing, studying, even indexing and searching, and even consuming testimonies. I think that happens in some cases. And that the attention that grapples with the technical and particularly the ethical aspects of these modes of engaging. So who is the model reader? What is a charitable listener? What is a more faithful, just, equitable mode even of indexing survivor testimonies? I think we also need to look for and return to additional sources of testimony that have been overlooked, understudied, deemed legally inadmissible. And here I'm taking things from each of your papers to say these. And third, we need to, I think, develop a richer, more finely tuned vocabulary for describing a lot of the things that we're talking about. And I think about things like the range of possibilities that exist between describing something as fact or lie, as faithful or faulty memory, as self-deception and deceit. These are all sort of binary words where I think we're missing some of the things in between. And then finally, the last thing is, I think in order to do all of these things, we need to have these kinds of multidisciplinary conversations, cooperation, international conversations. I think the different national contexts that people have been talking about have been really helpful. And then I'd also push for ongoing collaborative work among all of us, among subsets of us.
So, I think, yes. Because of the time, I will jump to the last question, okay? It may sound a little bit strange, but this is the question. If it were possible to establish an international task force to deal with testimonies, what would you suggest as its most important target?
I don't remember that question in the email.
Well, shoot from the...
Yeah, shoot from the hip. Okay, shoot from the hip. Let's start from that direction?
Oh, yeah.
I'll take it.
Can you repeat the question? Yes, again. If it were possible to establish an international task force to deal with testimonies, what would you suggest as its most important target?
Well, here are both most important target. I would say this. I think that I speak now from a Jewish perspective, and I think I feel very strongly that we Jews, both in Israel and in the diaspora, I too am guilty. Have been guilty of this. I've been very immersed in our own pain, and I think that perhaps the timing is right for us to be able to transcend our own pain and to try to regard the pain of others. And I would hope that as devoted we are to the mediation and transmission of the Holocaust, that we can use testimonies and also our general knowledge of the Holocaust somehow to reach understanding with others, that is to transcend our own pain, to see the pain of others, but use the testimony to build bridges between ourselves and others who have also, people like us, their parents or their grandparents who have also gone through genocide or other horrible experiences, and try to find some common language, which I think would be to everyone's benefit.
Okay, so it's a good question, and I think sort of from the perspective of where we're sitting today, here in Western Galilee College, beginning of the 20, no, it's not even the beginning of the 21st century, it's 26th.
That's true, that's right.
Hello. Okay. So to me, I think one of the, and I'll focus on one issue that I think this international task force that that we've created now could focus on, and it sort of relates to something that Amir was talking about, which is the challenge of digitization, the sort of the challenge that we face here now with the new technology, this sense that more material than ever is at our fingertips, right? It's all available. It's all out there. You can access video testimonies. You can access documentation, information. It's been digitized. You can get whatever you want. And one of the concerns that I have is that that's great, but there is also a great danger in that it can be overwhelming. That without the right sort of framework with which to decipher the information, to interpret the information, to access the information, there's a danger of it becoming the volume becoming so huge that it essentially is rendered meaningless. And my fear is that, I think about my students, there's so much information out there. How do you cut through all the noise and still make the argument that this is important, right? That the analytical points and the tools to understand why it's significant still need to be reinforced. But if there's so much out there, I think that the significance of the material can be lost. So that would be one of the things that I would want us to think about.
I would think practically that maybe what we need is a good journal, a good interdisciplinary journal. If you see some of the Holocaust studies journals are very oriented towards one discipline. For example, say Yad Vashem studies or the Holocaust Genocide studies are very historical. But we have people here coming from other disciplines. And how many journals will publish both historical papers and literary papers? I can tell you it's complicated because I work with literary scholars. And then you look for a paper and it's very hard to find someone who will do both. So what I think is we need a good journal as a platform, both for discussions, roundtables, a place to publish, and such a journal can be also a basis for seminars, something that is alive, not only, I know the practical implications, I'm just saying the dream. I think a journal can be a good starting point to put all the people who do it from different disciplines in the same place.
What language and what about accessibility, and I'm referring to the internet? Because a lot of these journals are...
we'll have to solve that. We'll have to solve that, because if you do an open access journal, then you don't have many, then that doesn't count for all the young scholars, their peers, their seniors don't respect them that much. And if there's a problem now, so you have to find a solution. We'll find one. I can think of several. But I think this has to be done. And this can be a platform to go on from here.
I want to come back to this kind of problem that I raised during our discussion, that the digitization of some material, some testimonies actually eclipse others. And I think the task force would be good to develop a model of amplifying access to a lot of more testimonies, and especially disconnected from money. Because right now I see the problem, if you are good in fundraising, you get your stuff digitized. If you have access to money, you can actually, let's say, steer the course of certain testimonies. But are they more important than others, which are not kind of digitized because there's no access to money? So I think that's a huge problem, that some collections are favored just because they have access to money. And I think let's say, agenda is the more access, the better the preservation is. And so I kind of try to lobby in this direction, and I would also echo what Gabi has said. I think sometimes I feel a little bit on unease, although I'm with heart and blood Holocaust scholar. I feel a little bit unease when we talk about all survivors are gone. Because this is kind of, there are survivors of other genocides out there still living, and we need also to pay respect to them, to acknowledge them, that, because taking testimonies, for example, is acknowledgement. Yeah? And so I think this is not just a call for the kind of amplifying access to Holocaust testimonies, but in general to testimonies of mass violence.
I have two concerns that I would want the task force to think about, and they're the opposite problem. One is the worry that people will become indifferent to the Holocaust, find it irrelevant, and increasingly it becomes less and less studied and thought about. On the other hand, my worry is that in response to that, people will produce things in ways that make the Holocaust more and more consumable, and it becomes a commodity. So what I would like to think about is the way in which we can responsibly, technologically sophisticated ways, in ways that make things relevant to students and to others, keep people interested in the Holocaust, taking on a desire to remember what happened, and that sort of thing. So I would like us to talk about ways to continue to teach and to remember and all of those sorts of things without either making the Holocaust a commodity or allowing it to become something that's irrelevant or that people are indifferent to.
I would just like to comment on the idea of interdisciplinarity. That's something that I live on because I'm an MD. I have no historical training, but I learn from all of you, and I think we have seen the last couple of days that we all learn from each other. And I think it's just different ways of looking at the truth. And I would also like to point out in terms of the topic of medicine during the Holocaust, we already have established there some educational units that are being used and make the history of medicine and the Holocaust very relevant for current ethics in medicine. So there are examples out there where where it is so obvious once you discuss this with, whether on the graduate level or even on the undergraduate level, I discuss these topics with my students, and within 2 sessions they see exactly where the relevance comes in and where this history is going to be very important for them for the rest of their lives, and they won't forget it.
Just want to comment that unfortunately we are witnessing, we are experiencing a true genocide in front of our eyes in Syria, and we don't talk about it at all. We don't mention it at all, and we don't think that it's something which has to do with what we are doing, as if it is happening in another planet at all. And if we are talking about relevance, this specific experience is really very relevant to our students and to the future of our world. So I think that it's a very important starting point, and it is something that I would like all of us to think of.
Zavit, our courses in the college for the next year include also Holocaust and genocide studies. This is a part of our subject, yes.
Also, children in the Holocaust is a subject of relevance very much to what is going on today. And this is an agenda we are trying to push forward, that you can learn from what's going on with post-World War II work with children in conflict to what is happening today. And we are looking for avenues to get this on the table of decision makers, that this has to be learned from. We are repeating experiences that were happening right after the war. And I think this is something we should look at.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment that I think I was reading in the paper in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago that Auschwitz was the most visited
Tourist place
in Poland last year. And they made a comment that they were projecting that it would become a tourist attraction over the next 5 years. So it was going from a memorial place. And they were looking at it more as a tourist attraction. And so what you were saying, you know, that you know, as time goes on, it will be looked at as a different concept.
For me, it would be very important that testimony are acceptable all over the world. I said that already before. And the second, that people watch them. Everybody, a lot of people gather the testimonies, but if they are in an archive or nobody watch them, so what? So, and I think you should make more ID that the people, other people, not only historian and the researcher watch such a thing. Otherwise, I don't know why gathering testimonies if they are in archive or nobody watch them.
I want to connect it to the word pain that you use and say that pain is transferred to generations.
Pain is what?
It's transferred to generations, second and maybe third. And just a very short story. After my son came back from Poland, there was a gathering of all the group, and together all the pupils and the parents. And the principal of the school, who was a general, high officer in the army before, standing in front of the children and spoke about his parents. That maybe the body was in the house, in the home, his mind were elsewhere. It was a very great pain to speak about it in front of his people and the parents.